The gods had condemned Sisyphus to ceaselessly rolling a rock to the top of the mountain, whence the stone would fall back of its own weight. They had thought with some reason that there is no more dreadful punishment than futile and hopeless labor. It might hit you while you're doing the dishes, the futility of cleaning, just for dishes to get dirty again. In fact, if maintenance is the true language of the earth, it is one long contemplation of futility. Things get clean to get dirty again. We feed and bathe and sweep just to wake up the next day and do it all over again. I have asked myself why enough times. I discovered at 12 that the most important of all questions, like why should we live, what is the point of life, did not have any answers. As for this myth, one sees merely the whole effort of a body straining to raise the huge stone, to roll it and push it up a slope 100 times over. Then Sisyphus watches the stone rush down, in a few moments towards the lower world, whence he will have to push it up again towards the summit. It is during that return, that pause, that Sisyphus interests me. I see that man goes back down with a heavy yet measured step towards the torment of which he will never know the end. That hour, like a breathing space which returns as surely as his suffering, that is the hour of consciousness. Those moments where I turn back towards the rock are the most profound moments of clarity. Sometimes it's crushing, contending with the weight of human suffering, the net that we're all caught in, the divine melancholy of our lot. Sometimes I laugh at the absurdity of the whole thing, the absurdity of the predicament I'm in, the fate I chose, the scheming that got me nowhere, all the work of living. And then sometimes, if grace allows, I'm happy to do it, happy to keep doing it, again and again and again. Hi. I'm gonna do my makeup and talk about the myth of Sisyphus. Me and my partner are coming back from kind of a futile trip. We were going to see their mom, and we were driving up to see their mom. And then we got caught in a really crazy snowstorm and had to stop, and then ended up staying at a motel. And then the next day we were just too exhausted to keep on driving, and so we just decided to turn around and go home. And it was funny because on the car ride, just before we had left, I saw someone post that quote from Albert Camus' essay on Sisyphus, the myth of Sisyphus. So the quote goes, "One must imagine Sisyphus happy." The conclusion. And it was funny because we were on the way as we were driving, before we realized we had to pull over and stay at a motel, I was saying how I really liked that quote and was talking about it to my partner, and was talking about how so much of, I guess, growing up has been about just acknowledging that fact of life. I really struggled with the absurd, with the futility of life when I was a kid. I would have dreams about burying sausages in the ground, but the amount of sausages that I had to bury would be too much, and it was like an impossible task. Like it was like a never-ending, absurd, crazy task, but I had to do it. I would wake up from them terrified and with this like sickening feeling of having to do this absurd task that meant nothing but was endless. And in this essay, I was kind of comparing it to the myth of Sisyphus. This myth of Sisyphus rolling this rock up this hill just for it to roll back down and for him to do the task all over again. And there was a lot of brushes with the absurd in my childhood. In many ways, I would call them brushes with the void, this negotiation of the utter meaninglessness of my life and my existence. It would be things like I would have times of staring at my sister, and all of a sudden, I would see her as if she was a stranger and I was a stranger. I would look at her and be like, oh, that's my sister, that's my sister. And I would repeat this sentiment to myself, and I would realize how meaningless that sentiment was. Like, I was like, what even is a sister? Like, there's this person in front of me, like this body who has a soul, and like in this life, this is her relationship to me. And then I would have moments of looking in the mirror as a kid, and I would see myself, my body, as if I was a stranger. I would be like, that's you, that's you, that's you. I would repeat that to myself in the mirror because it seems so absurd to me. Like, who is that person staring back at me? And there are times when it would feel like quite scary. Like, I had a really bad episode when I was 12 where I really couldn't get over the meaninglessness of life. I would keep asking my parents, like, so what are we doing here? Like, I would keep asking my parents, like, what is this about? Like, why am I here? Like, what does this all mean? Like, why am I alive? Why am I doing this whole thing? Why am I going to school every day? Why am I waking up and eating every day? Like, what? Can someone please tell me what the point of this is? And what's interesting, and I guess maybe the darker parts of that was, I feel like it was the first time that I was thinking about suicide. Not even necessarily in a active way, like wanting to kill myself, but more just like considering it as an option. Like, I was like, okay, well, if no one, not my parents, who I thought assumed knew everything, can tell me what the reason of living is, then why don't I just? Like, what is the point of me being here? What is the point of waking up every day and just like going through the motions of life and living if no one can tell me why I'm here? And what's interesting about the Albert Camus essay is that's really like where the essay starts in the question of suicide. I mean, he's mainly kind of pointing to something that is quite obvious, but something that I guess that we kind of miss, which the fact that there is this almost philosophical component of suicide, this idea that life may be inherently meaningless, and if it doesn't have meaning, or if the meaning that we ascribed to it previously doesn't pan out to work for us in our lives, then there's no point in living. And he spends a lot of the essay trying to negotiate that. Does life need to have meaning for us to keep living it? And what's interesting is I had written an essay. I had written something for Substack about joking about suicide or joking to my partner about killing myself, and us just laughing about it. And a part of why I wrote about it was mainly because it felt like such a necessity. I was really just in this like weird place and kind of dealing with the same negotiations that I've been dealing with since I was 12 years old, which is like the nature of absurdity, the absurdity of suffering. I think something that I also like really think about a lot is just how mundane suffering is, how ordinary it is. I know that when we think about human suffering, we think about these really big things like war and genocide and these really kind of inconceivable forms of human suffering. But I think in that moment I was really being hit with all the ordinary aspects of human suffering, and mainly the fact that really innocent, well-meaning people can end up really wounding and hurting others and creating a lot of suffering. And I was thinking about my grandparents, and I was thinking about my parents, and I was thinking about how much of my parents' inner child that I see in them, specifically their wounded inner child. And then I look at my grandparents and I see how innocent they are. Like, I see how much they are people who are just trying their best, that are truly good-hearted people at the end of the day, and who are ultimately innocent. And yet, so much suffering was created, so much pain. And in that moment, I was just like so overcome by the plight of humanity. The fact that, like how innocent people end up hurting each other all the time. And again, in a way, I felt like I was negotiating with that thing that I've been negotiating with my whole life, which was a sense of absurdity, a sense of a sort of predicament that we're all kind of trapped in, which is, maybe in Buddhism you would call it the wheel of samsara, that wheel keeps turning around and around and around, more suffering and more suffering and more suffering. Suffering caused not by evil, malicious people, but by innocent, well-meaning people. And I was just like, why? Why? But in that essay I posted on Substack, I kind of sort of ended it just saying, I don't know. And how much that I don't know felt so freeing, that no one can answer that question. No one can answer the most important question of life, like, why do this? Why? And I've been listening to this song by Pinegrove. Maybe I'll play it over this, enough so I don't get copyrighted. I've been listening to the song by Pinegrove called Need To, and the hook of the end of the song is, the singer goes, nothing worth saying out loud, so why do I seem to need to? And I think in a lot of ways, maybe this is just me, but if you have the heart of an artist and art, expressing yourself is really your calling. But I think a part of like negotiating, at least for me, about being an artist, and what I think that song reflects, is this kind of frustration I feel about how in many ways it's like there's nothing worth saying out loud. The most important things in life can't be fully expressed. In a lot of ways art can kind of get close, and perhaps like poetry, it's like the closest thing we have. But there is still something that gets missed, you know? There is still an incompleteness, an inability to say or answer the most important questions in life. Things like, what's the reason for living? Okay, I'm gonna put a little bit of glitter. This is the palette that I'm using. My friend got it for me in Korea. I've been adding a little bit of glitter every day to my eyelids, cause why not? It's winter, you gotta add a little bit of bedazzle to your life, a little bit of beauty to your life. And I think that that's why the I don't know in that essay felt so healing to admit and to say out loud and to like really purge myself of, because that really is the truth, isn't it? Like, the answer to the most important whys in the world is kind of I don't know. I think that as a kid, it was so frustrating and shocking to me and alarming to me that my parents didn't have the answer. You know, you think of your parents as all-knowing when you're a kid, and it was like that first moment of growing up where I'm like, damn, they don't know the answer to the most important question in life. Why should we live? And I know that people, you know, don't like when other people joke about suicide or make light of it in any way, for good reason. I think that that's really understandable. But I think that in that essay, really sort of purging myself of that and acknowledging how healing in some ways it was to say that, to joke about that with lightness in my heart, not in any cruel or malicious way or hurtful way. I think a lot of people joke about it in a really cruel way, but with a sense of lightness and levity in my heart, an acknowledgement that my predicament was absurd, as is all of ours. Okay, my phone ran out of storage, so we're moving to photo booth right now. But it felt like the pinnacle of like what absurdity meant to me, which is this kind of laughing in the face of the unknown, the acknowledgement that I don't know, that I must face the ultimate void that exists in life, that we can never know if all of this is worth it or not. But in a lot of ways, I think what I was trying to express and get at was that it didn't matter. That I was here, and regardless of whether it was worth it or not, I was going to keep doing that work of living. And not just that work of living when I'm feeling happy and in love with life and there's all of this joy, but also the work of living when there's a lot of suffering, a lot of negotiation with the nature of suffering. Again, I really struggled with meaninglessness, even just the sense of when I would leave the house and I would forget something and then I would come back and leave the house again, I would feel so frustrated about wasting time and how meaninglessness the first departure from the house was, because then I ended up having to just turn around and go back again. And it was like that thing that I couldn't get over. And it's in everything. It's in the dishes. I mean, how many times have I like lamented about, oh, I'm always cleaning my room. I'm always doing the dishes just for them to get dirty again. And I don't know if it's getting older or the old frontal cortex developing, or just even in a way making peace with absurdity. But I'm just like, yeah, I have to do the dishes every day and they're going to get dirty again. Like, we're touching upon a core truth about life. We're touching on the void. And don't get me wrong, in this futile trip to my partner's mother's house, there were definitely many moments where I was like, fuck this. I'm so annoyed. But as well, I'm just kind of like, there's no need to wish away life. Spending time in the car with my partner, having a heart-to-heart at Kelsey's Roadhouse. They're not necessarily meanings for life, but there is a certain happiness in them. And that happiness is created not because life is so meaningful and that trip was so meaningful. And now the meaning of the trip is me and my partner were had some time to connect with each other, whatever. In some ways, that is kind of like what Simone Weil in Gravity and Grace would call kind of like compensation for the void, like things that make the void better. Like, for example, when someone gets sick and people say, oh, well, you know, that's God's plan, or just like things that make loss, that make negotiations with the void bearable. And Simone Weil, the very intense ass woman that she is always like, we must look the void straight in the face, unmediated by compensation. And why was that trip worth it? Why was that meaningless trip worth it? I don't know. Maybe it wasn't. But does it matter? You know? We must imagine Sisyphus happy. And that happiness comes by choice. In some ways, it takes so much bravery to stand face to face with the void, stand face to face with the absurdity of our existence, and choose to be happy, and choose to keep living. It's the work of life. And if you're like me and you always have that black hole following you around, whether if it's in your happiest moments or your saddest moments, it's always there. To me, it feels like the most wonderful thing in the world to keep on living and holding that black hole close. Because it's just the truth. There may be no reason. There may be no reason. We might just as well be, we most likely are Sisyphus rolling the rock up the hill just for it to roll back down again, doing things that in the purview of the eons of the universe may have no meaningful significance. People will forget Beyonce at some point. And still, I'm happy. I'm happy to do it. It breaks my heart sometimes, thinking about human suffering and the plight of humanity, but I'm happy to do it. Because what else? What else should I be doing? What other thing would be better to do than life? What other thing would be better to do than spend a night with my lover in some shitty motel just to drive home again? The truth is a really miraculous thing. And in my writing, even stuff that's for the most part fictionalized, I'm really not interested in fiction or illusion. I'm interested in the truth. That's the truth. You know, that's the truth.